A very good morning to Professor Shenoy sir and dear participants. I welcome you. Sir, shall we start?
Yes, I am ready.
Yes, okay, sir. I welcome you all for the AICT Training and Learning Academy sponsored one-week online faculty development program on photonics, active learning in optics and photonics, organized by Department of Physics, Electronics and Photonics of Rajarshi Shahu Mahavidyalaya, Latur, Maharashtra. Today, we have a very distinguished guest, Professor M.I. Shenoy sir from IIT Delhi. I request one of our participants, Dr. Preeti Joshi ma'am, to introduce sir. Dr. Preeti Joshi ma'am, please.
Thank you, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sir. Good morning, one and all. Firstly, I would like to thank the coordinator of this FDP, Dr. Abhijit Yadav, sir, for presenting me with this opportunity to introduce our resource personality today. It is a great honor for me to introduce and welcome Professor M.R. Shenoy. Welcome, sir. Professor Shenoy has completed MSc in Physics from Mysore University and the PhD in the field of fiber and integrated optics from IIT Delhi. He is currently the Professor of Physics in IIT Delhi. Professor Shenoy not only has critical acclaim but also international recognition. He was a visiting scientist with the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering at University of Glasgow, UK and University of Nice Sophia Antipolis, France for collaborative research on integrated optical devices. It brings me great joy to say that Professor Shenoy is a recipient of the most esteemed Teaching Excellence Award of IIT Delhi. Besides, he has authored over 122 publications and has 1,274 citations. Professor Shenoy had prepared video lecture course for NPTEL and IIT Professor Assisted Learning Program. He is also a co-editor of the book Fiber Optics Through Experiments. He has supervised a large number of student projects and has been involved in several research and development projects. Now, without any further ado, I, Dr. Mrs. Preeti Sunil Joshi, welcome you, sir, once again and request you to address the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Sir, please start with your presentation. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much for the generous introduction. And it is my pleasure to join you in this workshop and deliver this talk. So let me first share the screen and let's continue. Yeah. You are able to see it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the title already have it there, optical sources and detectors in optical fiber communication. Before I start, I would like to give a brief of my research interests. So my initial work was PhD and my initial work was in the area of fiber and integrated optics. Subsequently, I went on to work on nonlinear optical frequency conversion, second harmonic generation, tunable optical parametric oscillators. So most of the work is in lithium niobate crystal. And more recently, I've been working on liquid crystal waveguides. And these are the three problems on which I'm currently working. Light scattering from turbid media, so measurement of turbidity of liquids for certain applications. And I'm also working on a novel design of optically pumped SOA, that is semiconductor optical amplifiers and semiconductor laser. So two PhD students are working in this area, and we have a major project for DRDO in this area. So today's talk, I would like to, before I start, there are many details which would be required, which are there in this full video course. As you already are aware that there is a full video course which is easily available free to download from the NPTEL website, or you simply Google my name you will get all the link to the lectures. So I am currently running this NPTEL MOOC. I do not know whether any of the participants are attending, because there are about 2,300 students are attending this course.
Sir, I am attending.
Oh, okay. So it's a
Semiconductor
12-week,
electronics.
yeah, September to December 2020 course. And next semester, I will be running another course, which is on lasers and introduction. Again, a full semester course of 12 weeks. And that registration will start from November 18. As most of the participants know that these courses are completely free. Only if you need a certificate, then you have to write the final exam. And I think pay 1,000 rupees as the registration fees. Otherwise, it is completely free and they are very useful to the beginners. All right, so let me start the topic of today's talk. I would like to tell right in the beginning that I would cover a wide area to give a general perspective to you. So obviously, therefore, it will go a little bit faster. It is not a teaching lecture, but it's a overview which will introduce you to certain aspects of optical communication. So let me start with the light waves for communication. You know why we go for light waves? Primarily because light frequency is very high compared to radio waves and microwaves. And naturally, when the carrier frequency is very high, the bandwidth becomes very high, and therefore light waves are capable of carrying much larger amount of information. That's why we move to light waves for communication. Our specific domain is optical fiber communication, and a basic a block diagram of an optical communication system is like this. You have an optical transmitter. It's a conventional electronic transmitter, and at the end of which there will be a source. The transmitter has an optical source which sends the modulated signal over an optical fiber link and then received at the other end using a photodetector. So the first component here will be a photodetector to detect the light signal and convert it into electrical current signal. And then it is like any other electronic receivers. So the transmitter has optical source or sources because there are multiple sources which are used. Similarly, the receiver would have optical detectors. So our talk is related to optical sources and optical detectors in an optical fiber communication system. Now, just to mention here, this optical fiber link, this depending on the length, for example, if it is from Mumbai to Delhi, or it's a 1,400 kilometer link, you will require amplifiers in between and dispersion compensators. Maybe Professor Vipul Rastogi or some these optical fiber components. So you would need in this link optical fiber amplifiers. So erbium doped fiber amplifiers are used in the link. So we have done significant work in this area in developing EDFAs. But today, because there is no time, I would not go into the amplifiers, and dispersion compensators may also be present. The basic optical fiber, I'm not discussing in detail any optical fiber, but just optical fiber, as you would have already heard in some talks, comprises of a core and cladding. Core is higher index compared to cladding. And in simple terms, light guidance can be described in terms of total internal reflection. I would like to say that this is in a simple picture, but a more rigorous picture using electromagnetic waves and solving Maxwell's equations will lead to modes in optical fibers. So modes are allowed field distributions, allowed solutions to the Maxwell's equation for the propagation problem, the boundary value problem, where an electromagnetic wave propagates through a dielectric waveguide. If you solve using Maxwell's equations, you will get certain allowed solutions which are called modes. These physically represent field distributions. And therefore, what is shown here is the transverse intensity pattern that is across the fiber. So the fundamental mode looks like this. almost like a bell-shaped field distribution, like a Gaussian field distribution with maximum at the center. This is the fiber cross section here. And this is the first order mode, second order mode, and higher order modes. So depending on the modes, it supports several solutions depending on the type of the fiber. If the fiber has a sufficiently large V number is a normalized frequency parameter, which tells how many modes a fiber would support. So depending on the characteristic of the fiber, it may be a multi-mode fiber or a single mode fiber. As the name indicates, a single mode fiber would support only a single guided mode, usually the fundamental mode here. And in a multi-mode fiber, it can support several field distributions. There are certain advantages, disadvantages, all those things which I will not go into. Maybe other speakers have already talked about it. So let me come to communication, the basic fundamentals of communication, which I'm sure all of you are aware. Signal transmission is traditionally done by amplitude modulation and frequency modulation. If you have a signal that is a time varying function, so with time, then it is used to modulate the parameters of a carrier. A carrier is usually a high frequency carrier, high frequency electromagnetic wave. And for example, in amplitude modulation, you modulate the amplitude of this carrier as per the signal frequency, signal amplitude here. So you can see the amplitude gets modulated. So this is our AM. And in frequency modulation, as you can see, depending on the strength of the signal, the frequency might become more or less. It's like chirping. So in a frequency modulated signal, the carrier frequency, which is constant frequency here, is modulated according to the amplitude. And at the other end, there are demodulation techniques which can be used to retrieve the original signal. So this is our traditional AM and FM. In digital communication, which is today almost all communication, most of the communications are digital communications, and an analog sample, this is the signal which you had to transmit, let us say. Then the analog signal is sampled at a suitable rate called the sampling rate, and each sample value means the value here. So the sample value at each time, this is time. So the sample value is represented by a string of bits, binary digits. So the sample value here may be represented as, I'm sure you are familiar with this digital coding. So this is an 8-bit code, 11001100. So there is no amplitude here, so it is 0. So whenever a digital 1 corresponds to a high amplitude, and a digital 0 corresponds to low amplitude. It's also called on-off keying in communication. Continuously varying signal is represented by a series of ones and zeros, and you transmit these series of ones and zeros in digital communication. There are number of advantages of digital communication, although the bandwidth required is more, but you know that it has a lot of advantages, particularly in terms of SNR, signal to noise ratio. Now, digital optical communication. In digital optical communication, a laser diode, which is the source, is pulsed. Pulsed means switched on and off at the input data rate. There is a input data rate coming here, digital ones and zeros, a stream of digital ones. These are electrical coded signals which are coming, which modulate a laser diode transmitter. So the laser diode switches on and off depending on whether the electrical current pulse is on 1 or 0. Accordingly, you get the output. This is light output. Light output, no output. Output, no output. That is on, off, on, off. So the digital ones correspond to an optical pulse and the digital 0 corresponds to no pulse. So this is the basic idea of a laser diode transmitter in digital optical communication. Fiber optic communication system has a laser transmitter here as an analog signal if you want to send, like the voice channel, the voice that we talk over telephone. Today, as you know, that all long distance trunk lines are based on fiber optic communication. All the intercities are linked by fiber optic communication. Even within the intracities, all major exchanges are connected by optical fibers. In Delhi or Mumbai, for example, all the major exchanges are connected by fiber links. So the voice channel or any other analog signal which you want to transmit is first coded optically, so digitally coded, and then that stream of ons and offs of light pulses pass through this and reach the other end where it is received using a photodetector, and then of course the normal process of signal retrieve, which is recovered to get the recovered signal. Now, two things you observe here, that one, the pulses here are higher in amplitude compared to the pulses received, and the pulses here are narrower and sharper. Here they have spread. This is because of the basic property, two important characteristics of the optical fiber, namely attenuation and dispersion. Attenuation refers to signal loss and dispersion refers to temporal spreading of a pulse. That is spreading of the pulse in time. Please see that this axis is time and therefore this axis is time here. In time, the pulses have spread and the amplitudes have dropped. These are the two most important properties of an optical fiber, which is discussed in great detail in fiber optics courses, and how to mitigate this problem and so on. Now, just to give you an idea, if you did not understand this, does not matter. Just to give you an idea, in today's long distance optical fiber communication systems have several wavelengths which are traveling through the same fiber, and that is called WDM communication, wavelength division multiplexing. Those who work in the normal RF, you are familiar with the time division multiplexing and frequency division multiplexing. So wavelength division multiplexing is essentially frequency division multiplexing, where you have different carriers. Here the carriers are wavelength. We call this as wavelength division multiplexing. In an RF or microwave communication, the carriers are frequency, where we use frequency as the number, and in light communication, use wavelength to represent the electromagnetic wave. It's a good question to all the participants. Why we use, don't have to answer me now, but why do we talk in terms of wavelength in optics? Whereas in all the electrical RF and microwave communication, we always talk in terms of frequency. We don't talk in terms, very rarely we talk in terms of frequency, unless you go to millimeter waves in the higher microwave frequencies. So otherwise, you usually talk in terms of frequency. All right. So in WDM communication, parallel data streams modulating several wavelengths, a minimum of 4 wavelength is required if you want to call it a WDM system. So usually the current day systems have 16, 32 or 64 wavelengths traveling through a single fiber. So what is shown here is different channels, wavelengths lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, lambda 4, etc. N number of wavelengths, which are multiplexed in a multiplexer. There are multiplexers, MUX, and then they are coupled to one single fiber. So this is a single mode fiber. All the wavelengths are traveling together in the fiber, and at the other end it is demuxed, and you again get all the wavelengths outside. Now, please see that the wavelengths which are traveling in a single mode fiber do not interact with each other in the linear regime. So long as the power of these channels are not very high, then these wavelengths do not interact, although they are all traveling together. There's no interaction, no interference. Only when the power becomes large, if you start putting hundreds of channels in this, the net power becomes very large, and then we have nonlinear effects. And nonlinear effects will couple the wavelengths and interference will start. And therefore, mitigating nonlinearity is also a very important problem in today's WDM communication systems. Let us see now, our objective is to talk about source and detectors. So the communication requirements of the source. Why are we saying sources and detectors for optical communication? So because there are certain requirements of the source. So the wavelength of emission should correspond to the low loss window of the optical fiber. These are the three. There are several requirements, but three major requirements I have listed here. So let us try to understand these points. So wavelength of emission should correspond to the low loss window of the optical fiber. So that means you know this is a relatively old plot, but you can see that the attenuation, what is shown is the loss spectrum of a silica based optical fiber. The current optical fibers which are used in communication are silica based optical fibers. The loss is given by this curve, and as you know, the loss is minimum in this window centered at 1550 nanometers, lowest loss window. And today's communication systems are all here. The first communication system which started was here. You may be knowing that way back in 1979 in Pune, they started the first communication system, and that was using this window here, an LED using here. But subsequently, people moved to this low window around 1300 nanometer. They moved here because, of course, loss was also low, but also the dispersion in fiber is zero at 1300 nanometer, around 1300 nanometer. Depends on the design. So around 1300 nanometer. That's why they moved to this window. But now all the systems are operating here in the 1550 nanometer window because dispersion is not an issue. Is there any question or anything? Okay.
No, sir. No, sir. Please continue.
Okay. Yeah. So today's systems are all in the 1550 nanometer window. So we can look at this graph. So this is now focused at the 1550 nanometer window. These are called the operating bands. So the currently used bands are the C and L bands. C standing for conventional band. You can see it is centered around 1550. And then this is the long wave band. And there are others, L plus and short bands, which can also be used in specialty fiber, in special fibers. So normally currently used bands are C and L. Most widely used band is the C band, which is called the conventional band, from 1530 nanometer to 1565 nanometer. You can see the loss is very low here. Some numbers are shown here. For example, 0.25 dB per kilometer. That means, what it means is after 12 kilometers, the signal left is 50%. 50% is available even after propagating 12 kilometers. So the loss is very, very low. Just to give you an idea, the conventional copper cables have a loss of 3 to 4 dB per kilometer. Of course, depends on frequency. So whereas this is very low loss. And this lowest loss is imposed by the fundamental limit of Rayleigh scattering in the medium. And people have reached this lowest value now. So 0.15 dB per kilometer is the Rayleigh scattering limit. And people have practically, technologically have reached the theoretical limit. So again, just to show you the wavelength division multiplexing, which I mentioned earlier. So the scheme looks like this, the WDM. Different wavelengths are inserted here. Okay, so why did I bring this here? So this aspect, so if you go back to the communication requirement, I was discussing the first one. The wavelength of emission of the source should correspond to the low loss window. That is what I discussed using these two graphs. So our wavelength of emission should be somewhere here. Now we see the next point. So the next point is, so before this, all right, probably I did not have. The next point is here, spectral line width of the source should be as small as possible. typically less than 0.1 nanometer. I will try to explain this to you very briefly. What does this mean? Spectral line width of the source should be as small as possible. As I already mentioned, the current systems are all WDM systems where you put large number of wavelengths in a single optical fiber, which are, so this is the MUX and DMUX, and these the transmitters and receivers. The total capacity is increased in WDM. So what is shown here is a graph which shows this axis is wavelength and this axis is the filter transmission. This transmission is 1 here. What are these different curves are the WDM channels, different wavelengths. Please see that these you cannot arbitrarily put any wavelength. There are international standards for these wavelengths. So I will not go into the details of those standards now, but what is shown is these are the permitted wavelengths which are very, very close. So that's by this graph simply is given to show that there are two types of WDM. One is called DWDM. WDM is wavelength division multiplexing. What is DWDM? Dense wavelength division multiplexing. As compared to, there is also coarse wavelength division multiplexing. In this low loss window, this wavelength range which is shown is around 1550 low loss window. Entire wavelength starts from here around 1530 and goes to 1570 or 1565 nanometers. Within this window, in a DWDM system, there can be 40 wavelengths, each separated by 100 gigahertz channel spacing. This is international standard, that the channels have to be separated by 100 gigahertz or 50 gigahertz. You cannot have any arbitrary frequencies or arbitrary carrier wavelengths, because these are international communication systems, and therefore the signal coming from US or Europe to India cannot be having some other wavelengths. If we are not agreeing with the wavelengths, then the communication will be jeopardized, and that's why there are international standards. Coarse WDM refers to use of simple laser diodes with good separation between the channels. Typically, this channel separation is 1000 gigahertz in frequency, whereas in DWDM, that is dense wavelength division multiplex channels, it is about 100 gigahertz per channel separation. Why I am telling this will be clear in the next slide. So this is what is the point that I am discussing. I should have put this slide a couple of slides earlier. So this is the point why the spectral line width of the source should be less than 0.1 nanometer. So this is what I want to discuss. Look at this. Try to understand what is this spectral line width. Line width is the full width at half maximum of the spectrum of a source. What is the source spectrum? If you plot the intensity distribution as a function of lambda, wavelength or frequency, then you will see the variation like this, always centered around a peak wavelength, which we call as the carrier frequency or carrier wavelength. But remember, there is a finite width for the sources in all optical sources. In optical sources, this is very important, unlike in RF and microwaves, where the line width is very, very narrow. They are almost monochromatic, almost a single frequency. That's why you don't discuss that much in those RF communications. But in optical communications, this line width is very important. And what kind of line width of sources? If you take a light emitting diode, LED, and find its spectrum, you will see typically delta lambda 20 to 40 nanometer, maybe 50 nanometer. If you take the normal laser diodes, Fabry-Perot laser diodes, the normal laser diodes, they will have a line width of 2 to 3 nanometer. But if you take single frequency lasers, I will talk about it, such as distributed feedback lasers or VCSELs, then they have line width less than 0.1 nanometer. Line width is this width, less than 0.1 nanometer. Why discussing this? Discussing because, please see, delta lambda and delta nu are equivalent. So in communication, we talk of bandwidth delta nu. Here we talk of delta lambda. And the relation is very simple. If you write C is equal to nu lambda, then nu is equal to C by lambda, delta nu is equal to this. So given delta nu, you should be able to convert it to delta lambda very easily using this formula. So that is what I have done here. So around lambda equal to 1550, delta lambda equal to 1 nanometer means 125 gigahertz. You can substitute in this formula and see. Delta nu is equal to 100 gigahertz implies delta lambda is 0.8 nanometer. Delta nu equal to 100 megahertz means delta lambda, that is this separation, is very, very narrow, very small. Now, why am I discussing this? I am discussing this because just now, look at this 100 gigahertz thing. 100 gigahertz is 0.8 nanometer. So just look at this graph. The channels are separated by 100 gigahertz here. Means the separation in wavelength is 0.8 nanometers between these adjacent channels, 0.8 nanometers. Therefore, if the carriers if you take a normal laser diode, it will have a width of 2 to 3 nanometer like this, about 3 nanometer. If you take a normal laser diode, it will not work here because all the will be overlapping. And therefore, you need the line width of the source smaller than the channel width here, channel separation, which is 0.8 nanometer. So if I go further, therefore, the importance of the narrow line width in WDM communication is the delta lambda of the source line width must be much smaller than the channel spacing delta lambda. This is 0.8 and this should be, that's why we said this should be less than 0.1 nanometer so that there is no overlap between the carrier frequencies. So that is the purpose. If you take 50 gigahertz, then the delta lambda will be 0 nanometer. This is channel spacing. Channel spacing means spacing between adjacent channels. Channel means carrier wavelength or carrier frequency. All right. There's another very important advantage of going for very narrow line width, narrow delta lambda. This is in terms of dispersion. Maybe in one of the talks, somebody would have talked about dispersion in optical fibers, where it is characterized by a dispersion parameter, D, which is given by this picosecond per kilometer. If you take the data sheet of any optical fiber, they will give you this D parameter. D as 17 picosecond per kilometer per nanometer or 22 picosecond per kilometer nanometer. So what is that? That is this. In this formula, delta tau represents the temporal spread of the pulse. How much a pulse will spread, an impulse will spread. L is the length of the link, maybe 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, whatever, that is the length of the link from one end to the other. And delta lambda is the source line width. So delta lambda in this formula is the source line width. Therefore, delta tau, what is delta tau? Temporal spread. Spread of the pulse is equal to dispersion parameter multiplied by the length of the link multiplied by the line width of the source. So you see that if delta lambda is small, delta tau is small. The spread will be small. Pulse spreading will be very little if delta lambda is very small. So smaller the delta lambda, smaller is the spreading of the pulse, delta tau. This is another reason why you must choose sources with very small delta lambda. And then it is possible to have large bit rates are possible without ISI. ISI means inter-symbol interference. Let me come to the last requirement. There are many requirements, but these are three important requirements. Direct modulation of the source at rates of the order of gigahertz. What is this direct modulation? So let me show you here modulation. In modulation, there are two types, direct modulation and external modulation. Direct modulation means you have a laser diode which is directly modulated. That is, the laser diode has a bias current the bias current is modulated by Im of t, electrical, this is electrical current, a current signal which is going. So the bias is modulated like this. When the current becomes 1, then there is an optical pulse. When the current becomes 0, there is no pulse. So there is no other component or no other device involved, no other circuit is required. Directly you modulate the diode with modulating the bias current, and you have a digital output here. Very, very simple. This is called direct modulation. And you can modulate at the rates of few gigabits per second, the rate, by this simple technique, without any circuit, without any other additional circuits. And this is called direct modulation. You must know that modulation at gigabit per second means what? 10 to the power of 9 bits per second. So in 1 second, that is a time, 1 second, that is between tuck, tuck is 1 second. So between that time, the laser diode is switched on and off a billion times, 10 to the power of 9 times. That speaks about the speed of the laser diode. When you exceed today's, there are new systems which are coming with 40 gigabit per second and 100 gigabit per second. Then you cannot use this direct modulation technique. You have to go for external modulators, where the laser diode is given a DC current. So you get a CW output. CW means continuous wave output, not a modulated output like this. You get a continuous wave output, which passes through an external modulator. The modulator is given an input current bit stream at, let's say, 100 Gbps. Then the output will come out modulated. This mechanism, there are electro-optic modulators or electro-absorption modulators. These are also called quantum well modulators, which are available at that speed. And then this is called external modulation, because modulation is done outside the diode, outside the source. Here, modulation is done directly on the source. That's why it is called direct modulation. So what is the point? Direct modulation of source at the rates of gigahertz that we need. And this, all three requirements can be met by only single frequency semiconductor lasers. So in the next 10-15 minutes, I will explain to you what is a single frequency semiconductor laser. First, semiconductor laser or laser diodes were invented in 1962, but today, so the basic structure of the laser diode, it's a simple PN junction, forward biased PN junction of a direct band gap material such as gallium arsenide, indium phosphide, gallium nitride, etc. And the discussion on a standard structure, today's structure of a laser diode, Fabry-Perot laser diode, is a double heterostructure. So there is a one full lecture is required to discuss about a double heterostructure lasers, but I will just give one slide and tell you what is shown is the longitudinal cross section of a double heterostructure laser, where a thin film or a thin layer of a low band gap material is sandwiched between two higher band gap materials to form a double heterostructure. This has several advantages, and therefore all the current laser diodes are based on double heterostructures. Now, for this discovery, of course, the 2000 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for developing semiconductor heterostructures used in high-speed devices and optoelectronics. It's very, very interesting to see what a simple idea that he had used to get the double heterostructure, which fetched him the Nobel Prize in Physics. All right, so semiconductor lasers and single frequency laser. So let me expand this single frequency laser a little bit more detail. So what is this single frequency laser? If your laser comprises of an active medium and a resonator, the longitudinal modes of a laser resonator are obtained. Longitudinal modes means resonance frequencies. So these are nothing but the resonance frequencies are obtained by simple round trip phase condition. Round trip phase must be equal to integral multiple of 2 pi. This is the same condition you apply to get the modes of oscillation of a string which is clamped at two ends. So round trip phase must be integral multiple of 2 pi. If you apply that, you get what are the resonance frequencies. And therefore, the frequencies are separated. What is shown is nu q is the q times q is an integer, c by 2 and L. So nu q plus 1, that is the next frequency, is q plus 1 times c by NL. Therefore, the separation between them is given by C by 2 and L. And this is called the free spectral range. So if you see the diagram, it will become clear. So along the frequency axis, you have resonance frequencies indicated like this. And the separation between them is called nu f, or free spectral range. The important point is the free spectral range, that is this separation, is determined by the length of the cavity. You see, C divided by 2 NL. If the length is small, the separation is large. This is interesting. Now, normally in a laser, if you switch on the laser, the gain for all those frequencies for which gain is more than the loss, a resonator is characterized by a loss line. So those of you who have not been exposed to a laser physics course, you may find it a little difficult to understand. But in a laser physics course, what you have is, for steady state oscillation of a laser, you must have loss compensated by the gain. And therefore, a resonator is characterized by a loss line. Loss line means there is a loss value here, and a gain of the medium. For all those frequencies where the gain is more or equal to the loss, they will start oscillating. Other frequencies here, they cannot oscillate. They cannot oscillate because the loss is higher than the gain. And therefore, in the figure shown above, oscillation occur at three frequencies, 1, 2, 3. You can see for these three frequencies, gain is more than the loss. And therefore, the laser will oscillate in several longitudinal modes. And that is what is shown here again, a little bit more clearly shown, that this is the loss line, this is the gain curve, and these are the frequencies which are oscillating. Now, the nu f, the free spectral range, you can calculate this for a typical semiconductor laser. Then you see that this kind of numbers will come, which means that in practice, if you take any semiconductor laser, it will oscillate in several longitudinal modes. I have shown only 4, but normally it could be 10, 20, and so on. I will show you some diagrams here. It will become now more clear. You have a semiconductor laser, and you know that laser has a threshold current above which it starts lasing. Below the threshold current, it is not a laser. It works like an LED, light emitting diode. So what is shown in these diagrams is the output spectrum from a laser diode which is operating below threshold, means it is operating like an LED. What is plotted is intensity versus wavelength. So this diagram I have picked up from Professor Ghatak's book, Introduction to Fiber Optics. So as current increases, you see the spectrum, output spectrum increases. Now this is below threshold. But the moment you cross above threshold, you don't see that smooth curve like an LED. What you see, the spectrum is like the sharp peaks. These are the longitudinal modes or the resonance frequencies that we just now talked about. So you can see the wavelength 8000, that is 805 nanometer to 830 nanometer is scanned, and this is the spectrum which is formed. So the diagram is shown to tell you that any normal laser diode means the diodes that you are using for simple applications like the pointers, the laser printers, the CD players, all the diodes which are used in these applications, day-to-day applications, laser diodes, are multi-longitudinal mode laser diodes. If you see the spectrum, this is how you will see. But you don't bother about the spectrum. You simply want to get some near monochromatic output power. But if you analyze, if you see the spectrum with a high resolution spectrometer, then you will see the output comprises of such sharp resonant frequencies, which are called longitudinal modes. Why am I discussing this? I am discussing this because somehow if you are able to make this laser diode operate in one single longitudinal mode, then you can imagine its spectrum. Its spectrum will be just one sharp line, which means the full width at half maximum will be extremely narrow. What is full width at half maximum? That is the line width. And therefore, the line width will be very, very narrow if you somehow make the laser oscillate in one longitudinal mode. And then we call such a laser as single frequency laser. Okay, let's. So how to get single frequency oscillation? Normally, multi-frequency oscillation leads to large. So if you have several frequencies which are oscillating, then you will get a large line width because you will get a net line width. Many applications require single frequency oscillation. So how to select a frequency? What is shown in this diagram is the concept of choosing a single frequency oscillation. The concept is common for all types of structures. There are various ideas which are used to get single frequency oscillation, but the concept is the same. The concept is you have loss which is higher than the gain for all frequencies except one. That is, if you somehow have a mechanism where the loss has a dip corresponding to one frequency, then that resonance frequency has gain more than loss. This is gain, this is loss. Therefore, gain more than loss, and the laser will oscillate in only one single longitudinal mode and is called a single frequency laser. There are different ideas. One of the widely used idea is insertion of a Fabry-Perot etalon. A Fabry-Perot etalon is a Fabry-Perot interferometer where the two mirrors are very, very close to each other with a small separation. If the separation is very small, then the free spectral range is very large. That is, the resonance frequencies separation is very large. So if you have, so let me show the structure here. Selection of a single longitudinal mode. This is a traditionally used in all bulk lasers, single frequency lasers. What they have is a tilted etalon. This is an etalon, Fabry-Perot etalon. Etalon is something with a fixed separation and small separation usually. So let us say this is an Nd:YAG laser. There's a gain medium and these are the mirrors and there is an intra-cavity etalon. Now the mirrors would give reflections back and forth for those frequencies which will pass through the etalon. If the etalon line width, that is the separation free spectral range of the etalon, is very large, within the gain medium, it may be a little bit difficult for those of you who are not familiar to understand this, but within the gain bandwidth, there may be only, because the frequency separations are very large, only one frequency for which gain is more than the loss because one frequency, all these, please remember, these frequencies are 100% passed through this. The etalon passes certain specific frequencies back and forth, and only those frequencies will pass through. Although the resonator, this spherical mirror resonator, would have supported large number of longitudinal modes, but the Athlon does not permit it to go back and forth. It permits only one single frequency or single longitudinal mode to go back and forth, and therefore the laser will oscillate in only one longitudinal mode. Let me show you a practical diagram of the diode pumped solid state laser, Nd:YAG laser. What you have is an Nd:YAG rod. These are the spherical mirrors, and this is the diode which is pumping this around 800 nanometer. So this creates population immersion in this, and it's ready to lace. It will lace when it gets a feedback from here. But what am I saying? That if we put an intracavity means inside the cavity Athlon, then this Athlon will permit only one of the resonances of this resonator. The resonator comprises of two spherical mirrors, but the Athlon does not permit all the frequencies. It permits one frequency within the gain bandwidth of this Nd:YAG material. And therefore, only that frequency will build up inside the laser, and what you get outside is a single frequency laser output. Single frequency means single longitudinal mode. There is nothing like a single frequency. Even the single longitudinal mode will have a finite width. Okay. But in a semiconductor laser, this is what in an Nd:YAG laser, typically this could be anywhere from 20 centimeters to 2 meters. It's a big cavity, and therefore you can place the Athlon very easily inside the cavity. But you can't do it in a semiconductor laser, which dimension itself is 300 micron. So in a semiconductor laser, which is only 300 micron, how can you place such a cavity inside? No. So the cavity or the frequency selective element is outside. So this is the semiconductor laser chip, 300 micrometer. The light which is coming out from here passes through an external cavity, hence the name is external cavity lasers. So those who work in this area, they conventionally call this as ECLs. ECLs are very widely used, tunable lasers, tunable semiconductor lasers, external cavity lasers. So you have a tilted Athlon outside the cavity, but it still is intracavity because the cavity is formed by this mirror and this mirror here, or the reflection which is coming from this interface. All other interfaces, this interface, this interface, everything is coated with anti-reflection coated material. Therefore, although you see so many components, your cavity is this and this. And therefore, this is like an intracavity Athlon. And this is the kind of lasers which are widely used in all research laboratories as external cavity lasers to get single frequency output, extremely narrow output. So the narrowness, you can imagine that you can easily get 1 megahertz as the line width of the source. 1 megahertz means in terms of wavelength, delta lambda is 0.0000001 angstroms. So you can imagine the kind of monochromaticity that you can get in such single frequency lasers. Remember, we call the sodium lamp as a monochromatic source in normal our BSc experiments, and sodium lamp has 6 angstrom. It comprises of 2 D1, D2 lines with a separation of 6 angstroms. And we say that, okay, this is a monochromatic source. But what is the monochromaticity? Here we are talking of a delta lambda line width of 10 to the power of minus 5 angstroms, minus 6 angstroms. So that's the kind of extremely monochromatic sources you can get this. Why am I discussing this? Because my objective is to get a single frequency laser in fiber optic communication so that I have no problem in DWDM systems. There is no overlap of the line widths, and the dispersion is negligible if delta lambda is very small. There are different schemes which are there using a rotating grating. I will skip and I will go to the most important, that is the distributed feedback laser. All the communication systems, high-speed optical communication systems today use a DFB laser as the, this is, I said this is very important. This is fine for all the laboratory research work. But for a communication system, you need a chip. So what is done is on the laser chip itself, you grow a grating. It is the same laser chip which I showed you earlier, double heterostructure. But in the cladding here, you have a grating which is different. And a grating is a frequency selective element. You know that this has to satisfy 2D sine theta equal to n lambda, then only it will have complete reflection or complete transmission. So if you use the grating equation to this situation, I will not explain this here how I get, but it is the same 2D sine theta equal to n lambda. You will get here a condition where if I choose the period capital lambda, period is this between peak to peak here, is equal to lambda 0 by 2 n effective. N effective is the effective index of this mode. Please see, this is the active layer where light is generated, and being an optical waveguide, there is a mode which is going back and forth. In a normal laser diode, the reflection comes from the two ends, and the resonator comprises of these two end cleaved surfaces at the ends. In a distributed feedback laser, the reflection comes all along this length because of the grating. The mode here is interacting with the grating. That is, as it propagates in the forward direction, it is continuously getting back reflected at one wavelength satisfying this condition. And therefore, that one wavelength gets feedback. Any back reflection is a feedback. The two ends are now anti-reflection coated. There is no reflection coming back from the ends. Only reflection coming back is by the grating. And therefore, you have the reflection which is distributed all along the length. Hence the name distributed feedback laser. It's a very, very interesting physics is here, and all the communication systems now use these single frequency lasers. So these have typical line widths of 1 to 10 megahertz, and that is very good enough for all DWDM communication systems. Note that, just as an aside, that a normal laser diode which you use in some application or some sensor or some toys or whatever, just 100 rupees, 200 rupees. A high quality DFB laser costs about 1 to 1.5 lakhs for one piece, because of the fabrication difficulties here, fabrication requirements, precision requirements which are required. But this cost is nothing for communication systems, because communication systems deal with billion-dollar industry, and there it does not matter. 1 lakh is nothing in communication. Okay, so this is the ones which are used in communication transmitters. The output spectrum in a normal Fabry-Perot laser, where reflections come from the ends, you have several longitudinal modes. This is a schematic representing wavelength versus intensity. This is called spectrum. So you can really see this in an optical spectrum analyzer, an instrument called optical spectrum analyzer. If any of you have seen, then you can really see the multi-longitudinal modes of a normal laser diode. If you connect a DFB, you will see just one longitudinal mode. That's why we call it a single frequency laser. The laser diode packages for communication look like this. I thought I should also show you practically how does it look like. So these are different. It is like IC, but you see it is 14-pin butterfly package. Butterfly package because the pins are coming to the side like a butterfly wings. That's why it is called a butterfly package. So it has 14 pins here, and you can see what is written. This is from a manufacturer's data sheet, Lasertron. So telecom trunk applications, gigabit components for telecom. So this is the rated output power is 1 milliwatt. It is a cooled 14-pin butterfly package, single mode fiber. So this is a fiber pigtail. This is because of dark, you can't see it. The fiber is coming from here, you can see. This is a black sleeve which is put on that. That's why the whole thing looks black. So this is a fiber pigtailed DFB laser. So this is the kind of component which are you. Maybe I have a photograph. Yeah, here. So this is how it looks. This is a photograph. This has actually gone bad. This is from our lab. So this is a DFB laser package. And you can see the 14 pins and the fiber pigtail which is coming out. So this is spliced to another fiber, and actually this is broken. That's why. All right, in the same diagram, what are shown are these are two photodetectors. You have to believe that I am saying, but because you can't make out whether it's a photodetector or a laser diode. Now this is a laser diode which is giving 25 milliwatt from Messrs Sharp Corporation, which is widely used in all CD players and laser printers. A laser diode here. This is 25 milliwatts it can give. A compact laser diode. You see a helium neon laser which is 1 foot long or 2 feet long gives you about 10 milliwatt of output power. This is a small laser diode which can give 25 milliwatts of power. This can also give, depending on the application, these lasers can also give hundreds of milliwatts of power, optical power. All right, so let me skip this. This is about the pins and so on, why 14 pin, etc. Maybe we will discuss, otherwise we'll run out of time. So the communication requirement, so that is about the communication requirement of the source. I discussed about the source requirement and therefore why we go for DFB lasers. That's what I have discussed so far. Now I want to discuss about the detector. So the detector responsivity should be high in the low loss window of optical fiber. The response should be very good of the detector. The detector should have a large bandwidth because we are talking of gigahertz bit rates in optical communication, nothing less than gigabit per second. It may be few gigabit, it can be, it will now shortly we will get 100 gigabit per systems also. It should have very low noise or dark current. And all three requirements can be met by reverse biased pin diodes. Earlier I had written, you remember, all three requirements of the source can be met by single frequency semiconductor lasers. So that's what I discussed. And now I am saying you can get using this. Any detail about any of these laser structures that I discussed, whether it is DFB or any of those issues, you can see those detailed video lectures if you are interested to know more details. But here I am trying to give you a broader perspective and outline of these. So semiconductor photodetectors. The basic configuration, here it is a reverse biased pin diode. You remember earlier for lasers also I showed it's a forward biased PN junction. This is a reverse biased PN junction. Why reverse biased? Because we need a photocurrent which is generated in this. Carriers are generated because of incident photons. And those carriers have to be swept apart to have a photocurrent in the external circuit so that you can measure a corresponding voltage output across a load resistance. And that's why we apply a reverse bias. It will become more clear. So let's go further. The detection mechanism is drift. Even I must tell you that a photodetector not necessary to have reverse bias. Even without reverse bias, you will get a photocurrent that is called photovoltaic mode of operation. But those photovoltaic modes are very slow detectors. And in optical communication, we are talking of high-speed detectors. High-speed detectors can be realized only by applying reverse bias. All right. The detection mechanism is drift current due to photo-generated electron-hole pairs in the depletion region, resulting in an external photocurrent in the circuit. See the diagram. What is shown here is the junction region of a PN diode. So as you know, what is shown here is the energy band diagram, and the junction region, which is about typically 1 to 2 micrometer in width. If I want to plot X along this, what is plotted is X versus the energy, potential energy here. So that is the energy band diagram. So energy band diagram of a PN junction diode. I have exaggerated or slightly expanded this junction region to make it more clear. An incident photon leads to absorption of to an electron hole pair generation. And because there is a built-in potential in the junction region, the electrons go down the barrier here and holes go up the barrier. And therefore the charges are separated. So there is a hole positive charge here and negative charge here. And if you connect a wire conductor from outside, then the current flows. That is the basic mechanism. There are three main types of diodes: PN diode, PIN diode, and avalanche photodiode. Almost all the detectors now used are PIN diodes, and therefore I will straight away go to PIN and why PIN. So why PIN structure? What is a PIN structure? So we will see the PIN structure in a minute. First you see this. This is a PN junction diode, which I have now even shown a little bit more exaggerated, expanded view. So this entire thing is the junction region. And there is a built-in electric field in the junction region. What is shown here is incident photons. Photons incident all over the detector surface, detector here, will create electron hole pairs everywhere. But there is electric field only in the junction region. Far away from the junction, in both P side and N side, the electric field is zero. And therefore, there is no driving field on this, and therefore the electrons and holes wander around and recombine again. They are free to recombine. There is nothing separating them. But the electron holes which are generated in the junction region are swept apart because of the built-in electric field. And therefore, of charge carriers leads to a potential difference, and which leads to a current in the external circuit. The point I am making is photons incident in the junction region only or primarily contribute to current in the external circuit. All the rest of the PN region is a waste. So any photon light incident on this part is of no use. Whatever photon streams incident on the junction region is very important. Therefore, if you need more capture area to capture light, this junction region where the electric field is present must be larger. And that is why we must go for a pin structure. So what is a pin structure? PIN. So highly doped P and N region separated by an intrinsic region. The photons incident here, all of them create electron hole pairs which are swept apart because there is always a high electric field in the intrinsic region if you apply a reverse bias. The field appears if you plot the electric field here. Unfortunately, I had not plotted. If I plot the electric field, it will look like this. At this junction between P and I, the electric field will shoot up like this. It will come down and then it will remain almost constant like this up to this, and it will come down to zero. What does that mean? That means all over the intrinsic region, there is a steady electric field. And therefore, all the carriers which are generated here, electron hole pairs generated because of absorption of photons, will separate out immediately. So you will have holes reaching here and electrons reaching here. And when you connect them, there's a current flowing in the external circuit. And that is the photocurrent IP. So that is the same thing which I explained is written here. Therefore, introduction of the intrinsic region leads to increased area for capturing light. This leads to higher quantum efficiency eta. The junction capacitance decreases. Junction capacitance decreases because the immobile charges are here. The immobile charges are here. Immobile negative ions are sitting here at the junction, this junction region. Immobile positive ions are sitting here, which are separated by this intrinsic region. So a capacitor plate with the positive ions, negative ions here, positive ions here, separated by a large distance leads to a small capacitance. You remember the capacitance C is directly proportional to the area and inversely proportional to the separation between the plates. And that's why the junction capacitance decreases. If the junction capacitance decreases, it will be a high-speed detector because the bandwidth is given by 1 by 2 pi RC. R is the load resistance and C is the junction capacitance. So smaller the junction capacitance, higher will be the speed of the detector. All right. So a detector is characterized by several parameters. First one is quantum efficiency, which tells you for a certain number of incident photons, how many number of electron hole pairs are created. Ideally, you would like every photon to be absorbed and an electron hole pair to be created, which will contribute to the current. Then it will be efficiency will be 100%. But normally it is not so. And the efficiencies are typically anywhere from 50 to 90%. Silicon detectors in certain region has about 90% of quantum efficiency. There are some simple equations which are given. The incident, the optical power, the number of incident photons is power divided by energy of one photon gives you the number of photons. And the number of electron hole pairs, if current is flowing, current is charge per unit time divided by charge of one carrier gives you number of carriers. That's why IP by E divided by, very simple. And you simply have a formula. The photocurrent generated is equal to or the responsivity multiplied by the input optical power. This is a very simple and very important formula which tells you if you have 1 milliwatt of optical power incident on a detector, if you know the responsivity, which is always given in data sheets of the detector, you can find out what is the current generated, photocurrent generated. Because all your circuits, rest of the circuits can be planned and designed once you know what is the photocurrent that will be generated. So this is a very simple so the responsivity is defined as IP by, and this is always given in a data sheet. And the responsivity, if you plot as a function of lambda, it's called spectral response. So this is a standard, a typical responsivity for 3 detector materials I have shown: germanium, silicon, and indium gallium arsenide. This you will find in almost all textbooks, that responsivity versus wavelength, textbooks in optoelectronics. So this is very important. Well, this line is the quantum efficiency. I told you that silicon reaches 90% around 0.8 micrometer quantum efficiency. That means for every 100 photons incident, 90 electron hole pairs are contributing to the current, generated and contributing to the current. What is the importance of this? This is a very important graph. You don't have to know any mathematics. You simply look at the graph. This tells you silicon has high responsivity in this wavelength region up to about 1 micrometer or 1.1 micrometer. Beyond that, silicon is a useless detector. Whereas indium gallium arsenide has a very high responsivity around 1.55. Why am I interested? Because my optical communication is in this region. Therefore, the detector that I must choose is indium gallium arsenide. This responsivity will drop down to almost zero, around 0.9. Therefore, if you are working in the visible region, that is 0.4 to 0.7 micrometer, then silicon is the detector, not indium gallium arsenide. But if you are working in the near infrared at 1.5 micrometer, indium gallium arsenide is the detector. Now, there are some data which is given here, the range over which detector can be used. You can also use germanium. It has a slightly lower responsivity. Germanium, you can see here graph, but you can use in this region also. Indium gallium arsenide is also a very high speed detector because the electron mobility is very high in this. I will not go into the details. Those of you who are interested in the details, you can see those my NPTEL lectures. These are some practical structures. So in practice, as you know, always you start with a substrate and grow layers on that, and then you deposit metal electrodes. I will not go into again the details. The main point of showing this is you must remember that in all our classes, we show PN junctions like this, like this. This is not a practical structure. It's only for convenience. Practical structures always you start with a N or P substrate and on top of it you grow, and then you create these junctions by either diffusion or any one of the methods. So a practical structure, you start with a substrate and then grow the required layers and realize the device. One last thing which I would like to talk is about avalanche photodiodes. So avalanche photodiodes, as the name indicates, have a gain because of the avalanche process. Relatively large reverse bias, but built-in gain in the device due to carrier multiplication in the depletion region. Typically, we can get a photocurrent gain of 10 to 100. They have higher sensitivity, but they are little bit more noisy because of the avalanche process, because of the multiplication process. It's a bit noisy detector, but very high sensitivity because we have gain. Now the carrier multiplication process can be illustrated like this. This is the same PN junction, but as you see now, we have shown it very much because we have applied a large reverse bias. When you apply a reverse bias, the separation increases between the P region and N region, the energy separation. And therefore, there's the potential here becomes large. When the potential difference becomes large between this region and this region, an electron which starts downward motion here, downward in energy, of course, this is accelerating, then it gains so much energy that it knocks off another electron in this region, creating a multiplication that is of carriers. Same thing happens, a hole which is generated here will start moving in the upward direction and creates additional electron hole pairs. And therefore, carrier multiplication takes place in this region due to avalanche process. And that leads to internal gain. This is the gain characteristic, typical gain characteristics of an APD, avalanche photodiode. You can see that the operating regions are here. Typically, the applied voltage in a APD has a reverse bias of about 200 to 250 volt, and you can get a gain of 10 to 100. But you have to be careful that do not exceed, because if you exceed the operating region, then the avalanche process will become uncontrolled and then it will break down. If you operate in the operating region, let's say 200, of course there's avalanche process, but it is well within control and you get a nice gain of 30, 40, 50 very easily. But only thing you have to remember is do not exceed the rated voltages. All right. So there I am coming to the end of this talk, that optical fiber communication, what I have tried to convey is optical fiber communication employs near infrared radiation radiation around 1.55 micrometer as the carrier wave. That is because single mode fibers are used, optical fibers are used. Laser diodes and photodiodes are used as sources and detectors in optical fiber communication. They are double heterostructure PN junction diodes. Single frequency laser diodes such as DFB lasers are used in high-speed optical transmitters. Indium gallium arsenide PIN photodiodes are used for high-speed detection. And single mode fibers are used as the transmission link. Now, before I wind up, I want to show a couple of things. Oh, this is some of the slides I've used from my colleague, Professor Tyagarajan. So I always show the acknowledgement. This is a book which we have, Fiber Optics Through Experiments, where the experiments are in the area of fiber optics are shown, and it is written as a typical lab manual, that is aim, objective, and procedure, and that way it is written for the benefit of laboratories. And then we had also developed a WDM kit, which is now, this is an older version. The new version is very nice looking. I don't have the diagram here. This is, you can see in the poster, it is written jointly developed with IIT Delhi. It's a fiber optic communication benchtop laboratory with wavelength division multiplexing. It is one of the only kinds where WDM is there. There are several fiber optic kits which are available, but this kit has wavelength division multiplexing. And this is marketed by a company, Fiber Optica, is also by an alumnus of our institute. I also normally want to show this because this is for students and teachers, and at least the teachers can guide it to their students how to pursue this area if you are interested. So if you are at the 12th level, not you, means your students or your children, then you can follow one path, because after 12th, either one goes for a BTech or BSc. If one pursues a science and technology area, then if you go to BSc, then you can do MSc physics or specialization in electronics or MSc physics. Then after that, you have to do an MTech, either in applied optics, optoelectronics and optical communication, laser technology, photonics. These MTechs are available in several institutes in India. In several institutes, the MTechs are there. IIT Delhi has 2, applied optics and optoelectronics. IIT Kanpur has laser technology, QSAT has photonics, and various places the MTechs are available. And then either you can go to an industry, or then you can go to pursue a PhD if you are interested. And then either you can go to industrial R&D or academics or R&D organizations. You can also go from MSc directly to PhD and pursue either a postdoc or academics or whatever. Similarly, if you do a BTech in electrical or electronics or ECE or engineering physics, any of these BTechs, you are eligible to do an MTech here, or you can go to a PhD in electrical engineering department. If you do these, you can get admission in PhD in electrical engineering department, and then you can again go for academics or industrial R&D. So this is the path which one can pursue. All right, thank you. So I think I have stopped almost on time, and I would be very happy if you have any questions or queries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Dear participants, if you have questions, you can raise your hand and ask questions. Rahim sir, ask your question.
Thank you, sir, for beautiful. Good morning, sir. Thank you, sir, for this beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Sir, please tell me something optically pumped semiconductor optical amplifiers, some work on.
This is a research which we are doing, and we are shortly coming up with something new. This is something very new which we have proposed. Actually, all the current semiconductor lasers and amplifiers are biased by electric current. But the device which we are proposing, you don't need any diode or a current at all. It will be simply pumped optically. So there is actually optically pumped semiconductor amplifier or laser is not new, but the configuration which we are proposing is new. So we would shortly come out with the proposal. So right now I do not have any material or a thing to suggest to you, maybe sometime in the near future. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gopal Kulkarni, sir, please ask your question. Kulkarni, sir. Kulkarni, sir, unmute yourself.
Of course, this is a discussion, so people can switch on the videos now.
Yes, yes.
We can be,
yes.
because there is no problem. And
Yes.
particularly those who ask questions, feel free to switch on the video and ask.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Or if there are some chat questions in the chat, that also I can take up.
Yes, sir.
So one of you, if you can read the chat questions, that also I can take up. Are there any questions in the chat? Okay, let me see.
Chat we have disabled, sir. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
Now I turned on, but
yeah. So
Bharti Patil, madam, do you have any question?
actually, I tried to give you an overview, and as I mentioned, that yeah, the details you can always see. Because each one, for example, the double heterostructure is so favorite, I can give a full lecture on that with all the numbers, you know, taking numbers and why the double heterostructure made so much difference. And that is very interesting. Yeah.
Yes. I think there are no questions.
Okay.
Now I request one of our participants, Ms. Kshitija Sutar, to propose vote of thanks for this session.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning.
Yes, I'm Kshitija Sutar, student of Rajashri Shahu Mahavidyalaya, Latur, and I am here to propose a vote of thanks. Firstly, I would like to thank our respected most distinguished person of this session, Professor Chinoy sir from IIT Delhi. Sir, you make this session very, very knowledgeable and interesting. Thanks for sharing such a valuable information with us on optical source and detectors in optical fiber communication. So thank you, sir, very much. Also, we get very knowledge from this lecture, and the way of you talking towards that topic, the observation is very nice, and we learn a lot of things from this seminar. So secondly, I would like to thanks Dr. Preeti ma'am for beautiful start of this session. And then I would like to thanks Dr. Abhijit Yadav sir with their style and own ideas of explanation for everything. Thanks, sir. Then I would also extend my vote of thanks towards the all teachers with this session, their cooperation with this session. At last, I would thanks to the all participants. Thank you, thanks all. Okay, so lastly, at the end of this session, I would like to congratulate to Dr. Abhijit Yadav sir for their achievement. He stands at 1796 rank among the top 2,000 world scientists in applied physics and material, stand in a top 2% scientist in the world. Congratulations,
Very
sir,
nice. Very
for your
nice.
well-deserved success.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
We all know. Yes, we all know your dedication and efforts towards that achievement. Wish you many years of achievement of your good and successful life. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for a very nice illustrative lecture. We learn a lot of things, sir. Basic things which by reading books it is not possible, but we learn through your lecture. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sir, actually wonderfully explain each and everything, sir, very deeply, sir. And really, I need to, I have to learn too much from sir. And definitely, I will see YouTube video and all, sir. And I will meet to you in IIT.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you, sir. I will be in touch with you. Yes.
Yeah. So I can leave now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Okay. Thank you and best wishes to all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.